And we're live.
Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to Morningstar Sustainalytics World Water Week event. My name is Kata Mohanar. I'm the water thematic expert at the company, and I will moderate this close to 3 hours long session today. Morningstar Sustainalytics is a leading global provider of environmental, social, and governance, or ESG, research, ratings, and data. We serve more than 900 of the world's leading asset owners and asset managers who incorporate ESG information into their investment processes. Now, the case for water is crystal clear. The World Resources Institute estimated that global water usage would outstrip supply by 56% by 2030. NASA suggests that 13 of the world's 37 largest aquifers have been depleted to the point where regional water availability is threatened. Lives and livelihoods are on the line due to prolonged hot weather and heat waves. A humanitarian crisis is emerging in the Horn of Africa, where years of below average rainfall put more than 18 million people into famine. Harsh drought also compounds water inequality in northern Mexico. Thirsty sectors such as food and energy production suffer under unprecedented temperatures, for example, in Europe or also in China. Nuclear power plants production is under stress. Staple crops are failing. Shrinking rivers like the Rhine lead to disruption of supply chains and riverine transport. Even an unexplored World War II bomb and ships are discovered in riverbeds. Hydroelectric production and farmers' irrigation are squeezed in California or in the Great Plains in the US, competing with domestic water supply. At the same time, communities in Australia and various other parts of the world, like in India, have been hit by major flooding. Talking about India in terms of groundwater quality, a recent government report found widespread exposure of citizens to toxic metals. South Africa's official Green Drop report paints a very bleak picture about the country's wastewater treatment, where over half of the sewage failed to be treated properly, if at all. So this mismatch between supply and demand on what is essentially an irreplaceable natural resource consequently means that it is not just a crisis of too much or too little water, but a crisis of management. Potential consequences for companies and their investors also are serious. Assets in water-stressed regions could become stranded permanently. However, looking at public disclosure, for example, that we use in our work at Sustainalytics to benchmark companies' performance across our vast universe of 13,000 companies, valuing the risk of or impact of water is a challenge. Basic water metrics, such as water withdrawal or consumption, is reported by under 8% of companies, while discharged water emissions is reported by less than 5%. It's an expectation by the EU water emissions for companies to report their load of toxic materials that I just referred to. So we would like to see governments, investors, and corporates taking more action to the right direction. We welcome and support regulations such as the EU taxonomy, the SFDR, the SEC's climate disclosure ruling, or the major climate bill passed by the US Senate. We also support networks such as the CEO Water Mandate, initiatives such as the new Valuing Water Finance initiative, coordinated by Ceres, which is set out to engage over 60 investors to increase awareness and to improve management of water-related risks and impacts. Tools such as the WWF water risk filter or WRI's aqueduct are tools that we also use within our work, and these are essential to support proper water risk assessments and to design adequate water stewardship practices. So there are multiple other examples. These were just a few that I mentioned. So the objectives of this finance track that we designed for you today is to capture the value of water, to ask questions and to provide answers about how the financial toolbox is imperative to help protect water systems and how we can also provide solutions. So the structure of today will look like the following. We will start with a keynote speech right away, followed by a multi-stakeholder roundtable. Then a set of case studies session will take place that will put water within the context of the net zero transition. Finally, we will host 3 parallel breakout sessions addressing ESG through water stewardship, active ownership, and disruptive technologies, creating opportunities presented by real water punks. I'm super excited. So with that, I would like to officially open our World Water Week finance track. And I would like to invite our keynote speaker, Jason Morrison, the president of the Pacific Institute and the head of the CEO Water Mandate, to take the floor. Jason, over to you.
Thank you, Kata. And I look forward to this discussion today. It has, for me at least, the kickoff of World Water Week, and I have a passion for this particular topic, so I'm very eager to hear where the conversation goes. I typically like to be pretty provocative, but that's somewhat hard to do when you're at 6:30 in the morning, your body's time, and the caffeine is still waiting to take effect, but I'll do my best and be as blunt as possible. If you're a water person and you are attending this session, you've probably heard the expression, if climate change were a shark, water would be its teeth. And that's because some of the most pronounced impacts associated with climate change manifest through water. Among other things, the climate crisis is a water crisis. It's also a social equity crisis and a biodiversity crisis, among other crises, but water is certainly toward the top of that list. That's somewhat of a metaphorical, abstract idea. So let me provide some examples of water-related news that's just occurring in the last week or two or in recent days. And Kata referenced a couple of them. In Sichuan province in the west central China, one of China's most populous and fastest growing industrial regions, the province there normally generates more than 3/4 of its electricity from hydroelectric. But almost a complete failure of summer rains, coupled with a heat wave that's coming on 3 months now with temperature exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit almost every day, has left these rivers and reservoirs with only a fraction of their normal water supply. And as such, the province's many large dams cannot generate enough electricity, even for Sichuan province's own needs, much less the surrounding provinces that it exports energy to, including metropolitan areas far to the east in Shanghai. And due to these electricity shortages, the factories there have been forced to close for up to a week at a time on a rolling basis. Another example, some of you may have seen in the state of California where I live, Governor Gavin Newsom announced a new strategy to double down on efforts to improve water resilience in the state. And a key justification that was cited in the rollout of that plan was the fact that recent climate modeling has indicated that the state will have roughly 10% less water available by the year 2040. And this aridification due to drier, warmer weather is occurring across the Western US and in other parts of the world, actually, with Mediterranean climate, such as in Spain, where climate scientists have predicted that some river basins there may have to grapple with less than 40% less available water supply on an average annual year than what they have now by the year 2100, actually. And then the Danube River that Kata also referenced is facing record lows given a historic drought. This has pushed this mighty river to the lowest levels in almost a century and exposed the hulks of dozens of explosives-laden German warships that were sunk during World War II. And these flows, low flows on the river are affecting climate, commercial shipping routes, not to mention the hazards associated with trying to navigate around ships with unexploded ordnance. And what we're seeing here with the weirdification of the weather is only going to continue and very likely be even more pronounced in the years and decades to come in the face of climate change. And this is why you're seeing increased calls to build more water resilient systems and to shift toward resiliency thinking and planning. For those that are not familiar with this term, you can think of a definition as water resilience being the ability of water systems to function so that nature and people, particularly those on the front lines and disproportionately impacted, can thrive under shocks, stresses, and change. And there's a body of work around key resilience strategies, including persistence, adaptation, transformation. Persistence would be how fast can you get the system to bounce back after shocks? Adaptation, how do you change the system and water management approach based on long-term stresses facing the system? Transformation, when do you really fundamentally need to change the economy or where people are living given climate change's impacts on water? And I just want to take a second to do a little bit of a commercial here and plug a session that will be happening here at Stockholm World Water Week. In fact, in a few hours, that focuses on a piece of work called the Water Resilience Assessment Framework. The CO Water Mandate has been working with partner organizations, including the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, World Resources Institute, and IMI, the International Water Management Institute, to develop this framework, which was released in a high level last year, but where the work has gone now is to develop sector-specific, very detailed guidance documents on how you can apply this resiliency framework. And the first build out that's going to be released later this year is one focusing on the corporate sector. And then after that, we'll also have one that's focused on urban utilities and basin managers or land use planners. So if you have a chance to catch that session, I would highly recommend it. Let me pivot now to how leading companies are thinking about water and business risk in the context of climate change. And in some, the leading companies are realizing the need to do more faster, the need to elevate the ambition and accelerate action. And this recognition was the impetus for the Water Resilience Coalition that launched 2 years ago on World Water Day with 7 founding members and a handful of partners. Now the coalition consists of 30 member companies with 3.5 trillion in market cap and 17 or so partners. And a key way that these member companies are elevating the ambition on water is through the concept and commitment to net positive water impact. And importantly, for the Water Resilience Coalition, this concept of net positive water impact speaks to 3 key dimensions of water stress: water quantity, water quality, and water accessibility. And the companies are committing to take action in water stress regions where they have operations, focusing on which of those 3 dimensions that are most pronounced. So it's a global framework that can be tailored to local context. For those familiar with or actually involved in the development of the Valuing Water Finance Initiative, you'd recognize that 6 of the key water expectations for corporations are aligning well with the contours of NPWI, net positive water impact, and that's by design and through conversation in the lead up. And then the ecosystem protection element I will come back to in a bit. One important aspect of net positive water impact worth mentioning is that it can serve as an accountability mechanism for both investors and other stakeholders. And that's because all 3 dimensions of NPWI are quantifiable, and commitments are typically time-bound and trackable. And therefore, there's an opportunity to see whether companies' strategies and commitments around stewardship are leading to the changes in places where they operate that are actually mitigating the water risks they're facing. So lastly, how do NPWI and water resilience connect? Well, in short, I would say this is done through integrated strategies and investments that are intentionally looking to multi-solve for a range of sustainability challenges. It's not just about increasing the reliability of water supply. It's about improving healthy ecosystems, finding solutions that are climate positive and that empower women and other marginalized communities. And there are a huge range of win-wins here. 2 examples are companies that have strategies around circularity or water reuse, and the investments in nature-based solutions. And let me provide some examples of this. When companies invest in their goals to have a positive impact, oftentimes they're looking to invest in basin health initiatives such as ecosystem restoration, including wetland restoration. And wetlands, for those of you that are not biologists will know, are really important in slowing down water during storm events, so they mitigate flood risk. And they also play an important role in cleaning water, either through sedimentation once they slowed that water down, or through assimilation of vegetation or decomposition of organic pollutants. So wetland restoration can help a company meet its net positive water impact commitment, but also be a long-term resilience strategy for the region. The last example is around companies that are taking on circularity or reuse strategies. Braskem in Brazil has done some long-term climate modeling for their operations in the Sao Paulo region. They realized that they were going to face climate-induced water shortages. That helped them justify entering into a partnership with the Sao Paulo Metropolitan Water District to build the largest water reuse facility in Latin America. And during the last drought, when there was quite a bit of rationing, both for water and electricity, they were able to maintain operations without having to cut back because they had a resilient water supply. And there are a whole range of other strategies, including groundwater overdraft and recharge strategies that are both important for improving the company's reliability of supply, but also to build resilience for the company and the regions in which they operate. So with that, Kata, back over to you.
Thank you, Jason, partially for being such an early riser, but also for the work that you do. I take from your speech that we really have to prepare for the unimaginable, right? And the past is not a good guide to future events. So thank you so much, Jason, for coming on to provide a keynote for us. We are going to take a very short technical break now. Please stay with us. We start our very first roundtable session in 1 minute. Okay, so I don't know if we have all our panelists with us, but I got the sign that we are good to go. Great. So welcome back, everyone. For those of you who tune in just now, this is Morningstar Sustainalytics World Water Week Finance Track, and we are starting the first roundtable discussion. I am Kata Molnar, the water thematic expert at the Morningstar Sustainalytics, and the host for this session, the moderator for this session. A couple of housekeeping rules. We have muted all lines, but the Q&A function is open for you to send the questions. And this is being recorded by Siri and will be made available later. The objectives of the roundtable that we have created for you today is partially to understand what strategies are available for investors who want to create difference for water and what challenges will they face from a risk, impact, or an active ownership perspective. We will also have a wide diversity in terms of regional representation. We will compare some European, North American, Asian, and African trends in terms of regulation and practice related to water and climate disclosure and corporate water management. The structure of the roundtable will be as the following. First, we are going to have some mini interviews with each panelist. There will be also time for interaction and reflections, and I will also address common questions to all, followed by Q&A, as mentioned earlier. So with that, let's start. Let me introduce our distinguished speakers today for the first roundtable. First, we have Robert Vichai, Portfolio Manager of Sustainable Investments at SCB Investment Management with us, Nosimo Makacha, Corporate Water Lead at Goldfields, Don McGregor, Business Engagement Lead at CWR, and Bobby Blue, Senior Manager, Research Analyst of Global Multi-Asset Funds Research at Morningstar. Welcome everyone, and thank you for being with us today. So let's start. Within the first round of questions, I will ask everyone to sort of focus on the theory of change for water in various regions, markets, stakeholders, as we will have the opportunity now to ask our various sort of what I call them advocates of water. So Robert, let's start with you. And the Scandinavian perspective, we have connected when SCB and other members of the Swedish Investment Network commissioned a report on how ESG data could be leveraged for active ownership, and Morningstar Sustainalytics provided data for that portfolio analysis. Just last week, SCB also joined the series-led Valuing Water Finance initiative. It really shows that you take the issue seriously. So could you tell us, how does a Nordic investor like SCB determine water risk within its sustainable investing strategy and process? And how did you end up being the go-to person when it comes to water? I believe we can't hear you, Robert.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. Sorry, I'm having technical problems all day. I had to work from home today. First of all, thank you, Sustainalytics and Kata, for addressing and highlighting such an important question. I need to start out by saying that I'm not the go-to person. I'm one of the persons within SCB and SCB Investment Management that talks about sustainability and subsequently water-related questions, and you abated to my background into the water and the question. I've been involved in the last 4 to 5 years in several different projects. One of the ones that you mentioned was the CV project together with you guys, where you provided the data, where we published a report called Accounting for Water in Active Ownership. And there we offer and try to help investors within the Nordic region to take steps in regards to evaluating water and water risks and opportunities for that matter. Now at SCB Investment Management, we try to approach the question of water like any other sustainable challenge that we would approach, and that's the risks and an opportunity perspective. We do not have specific water funds, so to say, but we do have thematic funds that cover water from both a mitigation and adaptation perspective, if you want to add a taxonomy spin on it. So water and water-related risks and opportunities are also part of every evaluation when it's relevant for our investable companies. So we have our own proprietary sustainability score, and this is something that we compound from a great deal of data sets. We purchase immense amounts of data in regards to sustainability. And on the risk side of it, we try to look at it from a risk management perspective, that is water management processes and that type of issues, and looking at what type of measurements and what type of guidance you as ESG providers can give us on that side. While on the opportunity side, we try to find more specific thematic data sets, which we find both from a small company type of specialist data sets, or a larger company that where we can break out data sets. So we try to incorporate the issue of water and the evaluation of what type of relationship between the companies that we invest in on a Nordic side versus the supply chain side of it. So we try to amass this, but unfortunately we are not doing enough. There are several reasons why we are not doing enough, even though we are one of the most engaged parties in regards to the subject. But I still think that we need to widen our perspective. The good part is that we have tried to build up our own set of view when it comes to opportunities in regards to water, and we are basing it on frameworks like the EU taxonomy, or trying to map revenue streams towards the UN SDGs. So our thematic funds that are focusing on water and circularity and biodiversity, that's where they get the information. That's where we start dissecting on how to manage this. I hope that gives you a good idea.
Absolutely. Following up on that, let me ask, what information would you like to see more widely available in the market to make better informed investment decisions on water risk and impact?
That's a wide question, and it's a very good question. Generally speaking, I would appreciate more standardization when it comes to data sets, and some sort of regulation when it comes to data sets in regards to water, and how deep that needs to go. I think it is too much data provider specific information out there right now still. But the simple answer is more transparent data from the actual companies that can be verified for us as investors, so that we can account for scenarios, because that's what we are also missing. One company might have data for let's put it from a carbon perspective, it's scope 1 type of risks, but they don't have it for scope 2 or scope 3. And that's where, in a globalized world, and what we are looking at when we evaluate companies, and it's pretty interesting that Jason picked up on that from Sichuan region. Foxconn is one of the major companies that has a production site there, and they had to basically close off, as Jason was evading to, production. That means that Apple basically, that's using Foxconn as one of the major components in its supply chain, is hurt. Now, our investment in Apple might be limited, but at the same time, if we are investing in retailers that resell Apple, then we have another problem, and we have a third problem, and it's not directly related to the company that we actually invest in, but it's within the supply chain. So that type of information and that type of key data sets, which connects the relationship between both companies and sectors, would be, something that I would be very happy to purchase, so to say.
Great, thank you so much. We will move on to talk to Bobby, but rest assured we follow up on the points you made. So Bobby, welcome to the panel as well. Please explain first what you do, and then how did you start to work on water funds? Is it common for a multi-asset fund researcher to cover sustainability funds?
Yeah, thanks, Gata, and thanks for this great panel this morning. Yeah, so at Morningstar, I'm a fund research analyst, so that broadly entails talking to asset managers, evaluating their strategies, learning how they approach investing, and then making an assessment on if it's a viable approach or not. As part of my remit, I cover commodity strategies, and I've expanded that in recent years to include some of the thematic water strategies that are available on the market. I would say it's still a fairly niche area in the broader public equity landscape, particularly here in the US. There's under 10 billion in AUM, and these types of strategies, it's much more of a focus in the EMEA markets. So I would say that it's still a fairly novel part of the US investment landscape, and one that we're still wrapping our heads around. So I think that it's certainly something that we're keeping an eye on, but as of now, there's still a lot of development that's going to be needed, a lot of maturation of the market, both in terms of the data that we have on companies, but also the types of companies that are available to invest in. When we look at a lot of the strategies and the companies that they're investing in, it tends to be companies that might not have a pure play focus on water, because there just aren't that many types of those companies in the public equity universe right now. So we expect over time for the market to mature, but right now it still is, like I said, a fairly novel part of the thematic universe.
Mm-hmm. Could you talk to us more about what have you found out about these thematic funds' potential through working on their ratings?
Yeah, sort of what I was just alluding to. It's very difficult for these strategies to directly impact water-related issues. When you look at the thematic lineup right now, you see companies that, in the top 5, top 7, 10 holdings, you might find some pretty direct exposure to the water markets. These are companies like Xylem or Pentair or American Water Works. These companies, are tied very closely to the water markets and water efficiency and water usage practices. But when you look a little further into the lineup, you'll find a lot of industrial conglomerates. For example, General Electric is one of the largest producers of desal technology, but that desal business isn't what's driving the price. So you end up with a portfolio of companies that's, pardon the pun, fairly watered down, and you have a lot of companies in these portfolios that really don't have too much to do with the business of water when you look at their entire business. So that means that an investor in these strategies, they might think they're getting sort of a pure play on water, and that's just not the case. What we find is these strategies tend to have a lot more exposure to broader infrastructure trends, which is fine. That's a viable investment strategy. But for an investor that's specifically seeking to play out or invest in the water theme, it's really challenging to do so right now from a sort of pure play angle.
Okay, we will get back to also some data related issues, but what I'm taking from you is that it's really difficult to connect localized impact through water funds. Let's continue with Nosimo. Nosimo, you were introduced to me as a true water champion. Please tell us how do you think about water at Goldfields?
Okay, thank you so much, Kata, for the opportunity to speak. I'm Nosimo. I'm working for Goldfields, a gold mining company. It has operations in 5 countries, in Africa, Australia, and in South America. And as you understand, water, as explained earlier, is more localized, and then it's a shared resource. And most of our operations are situated in water-stressed catchments. And this is being made worse by the impacts of climate change, as everyone said. Being it, we get like operations that don't have water and that have more water, like for example, in Ghana. So we have to make sure that we are resilient to climate change in both scenarios. So we began our journey in 2017 because of the risks that we've experienced, because we do need water for our mining and processing activities. But not forgetting that it is a shared resource. Our communities around us need this same resource. So we developed a strategy that has 3 pillars. The first pillar is the water security. We need to make sure that we have water for our processing so that we can continue with our business, and make sure that we don't pollute our water resources, because water can move outside your boundaries. So we have to manage water quality. At the same time, we need to make sure that we use this water efficiently. We have set ourselves targets to recycle 80% of our water by 2030 and make sure that we reduce water withdrawal, especially fresh water, by 45% by 2030. And then catchment management approach, where we are working closely with the stakeholders in the catchment and understand the common opportunities outside our fence that impact everybody in our catchments. So those are the pillars that we have in terms of the strategy for Goldfields. And at this point in time, we've managed to save 35% of our water withdrawal and recycled 75% of our water since we began the journey. So, I mean, that is our strategy at this point in time because of the challenges that we face in operations where we operate.
Fantastic. It sounds like a very impressive self-reflection as well on where you're coming from and the journey you're through. Can you still expand a little bit about the successes and the challenges that you have experienced during this journey?
Okay, as mentioned, up to date, we have we have managed to save 35% of our water. We reduced 35% of our water withdrawal, and that is a positive impact because we're making sure that we don't take water from the communities and the catchment. And we have recycled our water by 75%. Those are the successes. And at the same time, we have improved our CDP water score. We are in the leadership position. We've managed to obtain an A score. And then in terms of the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, we've improved significantly as well in terms of the water risks and operational efficiency as a result of the work that we have done since we began a journey in 2017.
Fantastic, very impressive. We will get back to you, Nosimo, as well with some further questions. And finally, Dawn, first of all, thank you so much for staying up this late. You're based in Singapore, if I'm correct. You represent CWR. Please tell us more about what you do and a bit about the Asian water and ESG landscape, please.
Sure. Thanks, Kata, and Morningstar Sustainalytics for having me on the panel. And we're always up in Asia, so it doesn't matter too much. CWR, we're a think tank based in Hong Kong, started in 2011 with the aim to embed water and climate risks in business and finance. And that's because we felt that there was this gap. There was a lot of ecosystem biodiversity work happening, which is very important for global health, global water health. But with agriculture, industry, and, domestic use of water taking up the majority of water, easy 80–90%, if you don't tackle how water is used in those industries and in those sectors and change that, then we weren't going to change our water future. And Hong Kong being an international finance hub and a main Asia hub, that's why we set up there. And we're happy to say, 10 years on, the conversation has changed drastically. From us coming along and trying to say water is a risk for your portfolio, water risk is for a risk for your company. We now am doing reports with various financial institutions like HSBC, CLSA, and working with corporates. We now have the leading financial institutions and those in the financial community and corporates coming to us, over the last several years and being like, we know water is a risk, a material risk. So now what do we do? So that conversation has shifted drastically in the last 10 years. And so while we continue to raise awareness about embedding water and climate risks in finance and business, we're also transitioning and helping these leaders to figure out what comes next now that you've identified these risks. And so we help them assess, strategize, and adapt. And in Asia, that's particularly important because you directly feel the water and climate impacts, and water is actually how you will feel most of the climate impacts, whether it's too much, we've got floods, sea level rise, so on, and then too little, droughts, and you see wildfires and things like that. So it's very much in your face, and it's very much a disruptive risk in Asia. You feel it because you're the ones manufacturing, you're the ones with a lot of transportation systems and infrastructure systems and so on.
Mm-hmm. Well, you almost answered my next question. We would have been, we definitely need more Asian players to sort of be part of the solutions, but I feel like transparency is not that widespread. So what is the level of awareness among investors and corporates over there? But you sort of allude to the fact that it's actually increasing. Would you agree to that?
Oh, it's definitely increasing. And in Asia, and especially in more of the, say, the financial hubs or capital cities and so on, everyone's very aware of international disclosure, regulations, the upcoming ISSIB, there's a TCFD and everything like that. And people are doing it, right? The companies, the investors and so on, it's mandatory or will be soon mandatory. So of course they will tick the box. But it's also a very different, if you allow me to say, waterscape, landscape here in Asia. And, we, in our discussions, we said water is contextual, and water in Asia is highly different to water in Europe or the US or South America. And the amount of water that's being used for relatively low value output is becoming a big issue, and that's raising further awareness. But when you've got a power house like China, and India, the disclosure and, say, the investor focus is shifted. There's such big domestic markets that when you're thinking, I have enough audience so much in China or India, and so why do I need to meet these international requirements of disclosure, or these, international investors are asking me to do A, B, C, D. And I mean, internationally, there's a lot of disclosure fatigue, reporting fatigue. And so for these, companies in China and India, where they have their own domestic regulations and disclosure regulations to meet as well, it's adding on, and with a different sentiment and urgency around the risk, because they're the ones dealing with water, dealing with the pollution. It's sometimes difficult to find that balance to be like, yes, we will do ours and, the international requirements from foreign investors.
I see. I will open now to any thoughts, reflections, or comments from our other panelists. If anyone wants to ask any question or make comments to what has been just said.
I'll maybe mention one thing that Jason mentioned earlier, actually, something that we're starting to see in Asia. It's more new here, although still quite new in America and Europe, is companies responding maybe to more investor focused or trying to become more resilient and so on, is transitioning to becoming water neutral or water positive. And that's what Jason mentioned before. So actually in Hong Kong, you know, we've been helping some conglomerates transition their portfolio, setting strategies around that. And so that's actually quite exciting.
Can you help define what it means, water neutral, water positive, for the companies you work with?
Sure. So that's also, it's actually one of the tricky points of trying to help them with, because, you know, in carbon, we've got net zero carbon, and there's a definition, and it's very, you know, strict in what it is. With being water neutral, water positive, while there is that WRC, the coalition that Jason mentioned, that is at the moment the only standard. It's not a global one. So there's still some leeway, but essentially companies optimize their water use, you know, reduce, recycle as much as possible, and then replenish the water that they're not able, you know, to not use. And so that's starting to bring in big questions as well in Asia, because when you're looking at transboundary issues, and Asia's got 10 major rivers. So, you know, if you're a company in Hong Kong, they get 80% of the water from the Dongjiang River in China. You know, if you're going to the riverbed, river basin level, are you going to go upstream and do the replenishment projects and so on? So some very interesting conversations happening.
Nosimo, is this something that you're also thinking about? You mentioning all these water management programs and reductions and recycling that you are doing within Goldfields. Is water neutrality or being water positive a concrete direction, a set goal for you as a company?
It's something that we started to talk about as part of the long-term strategy that we're busy developing, but we just have to understand it better so that when we commit to it, we do something about it.
I see.
Can I just comment on all this net zero and net neutrality? I mean, for us as investors, it's becoming a bit of a farce, the whole net zero type of discussion, because many companies, especially in heavy polluting industries and sectors, are using, you know, different methodologies, different type of offsets that you can't really follow, and the company communication versus the company action is misaligned. So this is where we need to be very careful when we are trying to do these things with replenishment or offsetting the carbon, because we can't rely on that side to be net zero. We need to be proactive and try to hinder stuff before it happens, rather than afterwards, or commit to doing something bad right now, but we will offset it here, because we do not have time either when it comes to water or for climate change when it comes to carbon. So it's important when we discuss, at least with companies, that this is not the major part of their net strategies, because that's something that needs to be highlighted here.
So Robert, how do you identify leaders and laggards? How do you use data to identify them?
I mean, this is once again a very interesting question, a very broad question. But Bobby was talking about these water funds and talking about that you have these companies that where water is maybe not the primary part of their business model. But at the same time, we as investors need to try to identify any type of possibility where we see any type of enablement or any type of mitigation or adaptation activity within the company, and we need to go by those revenue streams. And when we engage with companies, we need to push those buttons so that they increase their revenues on that side rather than increasing it somewhere else. So for us, when we look at these parts, we try to use and compound as much data as possibly can. So we use quant models to compound our composite score in order for us to be able to know which are laggards and which are leaders in every sector from many different perspectives. And we're trying to do this on an absolute level, but we're also trying to do it on a geographic versus sectorial level, because you can't compare Asian companies at all times with European companies because of different standards and different regulations, and Don was talking about that side. But what you can do is try to map through data dependencies between companies and looking at on the supply chain level and try to map that. Now, unfortunately, as I was talking about before, the data side is really limited on that side, and the third part that we're trying to do is the engagement side, and that's also a problem because we can engage with, let's put it, ABB, a Swedish company that is involved in smart irrigation in some parts, or we can talk to another big Swedish company and highlight these issues, but they themselves have supply chains that come from areas where communication and engagement is not really it's not a positive thing. So whenever we try to talk to supply chains within a company based on the data that we compound, it's very difficult to come forth and try to change something, and that's a frustrating side of the company engagement side. But the data that we use will give us the help to be able to engage, but we're not there yet.
Bobby, could we go back to you and ask you about the type of corporate data that you drew on for your assessments?
Yeah, and I'd like to respond to Robert's points as well, and just highlight that, sort of to your question, Kata, that we found that managers that are active and engaging and understanding their businesses are far more impressive stewards and far more focused on these water issues than maybe a purely passive, purely quantitative approach. Given some of the shortcomings in the data, it is really hard to tease out a company's water risks exclusively from their filings at this point. So really getting in, talking to management, understanding their supply chains, understanding the risks contained within those supply chains is really important. And something that, when you're looking at these types of investment strategies, if you're interested in water risk, it's something that should be prioritized. As far as the data that I was looking at, it is challenged right now in North America. Some of the SEC proposals will help solve some of those issues. But right now, when you're looking at exposure to water, a lot of what you have are just revenue line items. Where are they getting their revenue? What are the sources of that revenue? And then using sort of fundamental analysis to tease out what might impact those sources of revenue. The SEC has some proposals around enhancing some of the sort of climate change related risks, many of which are water related risks. But until those fully come through, it will be challenging to fully tease some of that out.
Mm-hmm. In the language that we actually went through as well, the SEC disclosure ruling went into those very details of focusing on corporate disclosure on highly water stressed regions and connecting sort of the asset level data with the actual business activities happening. So yeah, I totally agree that those are the types of data that we also lack in terms of our own assessment on materiality or impact. Okay, before moving on, are there any last comments?
I might just totally agree with what Robert said, having said, it is exciting about these companies moving or implementing water neutral, water positive strategies. It's not going to solve everything, and it's not like, hello investors, we're doing this, we're fabulous. You definitely have to do the deep dive, and it's a really high initial step. But the real value in it, at least in our engagement with the companies and talking to investors, is it helps them really understand the value of water beyond just paying utility, beyond saying, yes, it's been a World Economic Forum top risk for X amount of years, yes, it's material, yes, everyone wants to know about it, because they actually have to do the maths. How much are we using? How much would we need to replenish? And then the contextual side of water means, where are we using it? How do we need to replenish it? At what quantity, at what quality? What are the stakeholders? It's so different to carbon. It's not fungible. 1 liter of water in Hong Kong to 1 liter of water within Sichuan, we've mentioned there, or in Shanghai, or along the Brahmaputra, or along the Seine in France. It's everything's so different, and it's very complicated. And at the base level, it's just really great that the companies that are setting these, strategies or targets are having to finally understand that.
Yeah.
So that was partly why it's exciting, because the frustration and the oh no's and all of that. But yeah, just wanted to share that point.
Yeah, no, and let's just stick to that sort of regulatory piece and data piece with you, Dom, because you could talk to us about two interconnected things in the Asian region: data disclosure at the corporate level, the quality and the consistency and the transparency to account for the true value of water, as well as the water and climate disclosure regulation. What are the trends that you see?
I think a little bit, I spoke to that earlier, in the different, not so much attitude, but expectations domestically or in the Asia region versus an international sphere. I mean, if you look at China, for example, and say the fashion industry, I actually helped Business of Fashion. They've released their second sustainability index. And this year they added an extra 15 companies. So it's the top largest 30 listed fashion companies globally. And unfortunately, one of the main ones from China, because the disclosure requirements and they're domestic and they're not, they're just within China, they actually scored incredibly low because the disclosure is just not mandatory to the same level. And the need for transparency is very different. And if we stay within the fashion industry, I think some on the call will know, with knowing water and fashion industry, there was a lot of controversy around BCI cotton in China over the last year. And now China actually has its own cotton standard. And so, what are companies doing about that? International companies, China domestic companies, fashion, textile, the manufacturers, that's the standard that they will want to disclose on and meet, be compliant with. So then you're introducing this international standard that's, there's been some issues around it. Is it worse being accredited to that level as well? But that's when the international investors want, the domestic ones not so bothered. So that it's this kind of discussion between regional country or regional and international then.
Okay, so there are like commodity-based, sector-based, and some locally specific. For
sure. I mean, especially in China, if you're talking about being compliant and disclosing, I mean, there's specific industry ones, and we've got the mining industry also on the line, and with Nasimo, and in China there's really strict mining regulations, water recycling mining regulations, quotas that have to be met, recycling levels, and so it becomes, once you go down the rabbit hole, then you could keep going down a long time.
Sure. Nasimo, can you talk to us also about some general sort of issues regarding regulation for your sector, also obtaining licenses and general public policy and infrastructure to supply water for your operations? What do you observe at the mine site level?
Okay, thank you so much, Katja, for that. We operate in countries that have stringent environmental regulatory requirements that we have seen, and you cannot operate without having a mining permit and a water permit. And then to make sure that you withdraw water, I mean, that is enough for your operation. And then they go to, I mean, the government or the regulators, to an extent of understanding the reserve around the catchment where you operate before they can allocate the volumes that you need, so that they don't allocate water before they can give other stakeholders like basic human consumption, environmental, aquatic economy, aquatic environment. So in all the countries that we have operation, I mean, it's similar, that allocation hierarchy is being followed and it's being monitored to make sure that you adhere or you comply with the commitments or the requirements of the permits that have been given. So if, for example, there is the government propose a change, we have bodies in all our countries, for example, that represent the mining companies, for example, the Chamber of Mines, where, I mean, if ever there's a regulation that is being proposed by the governments, it gets discussed, we provide comments so that you can understand what it means for us, so that you can be prepared for that. So even like if ever there are water tariffs that are being proposed, we discuss, we provide comments, and we agree to say, okay, no, it's not gonna work for us, or it's gonna work. But we do that through the body, which is like the Chamber of Mines, the Minerals Councils. We don't do individually and approach the governments where we operate.
I see. Are there differences in terms of water cost across the locations, or do you observe changes of water costs due to an emerging extreme weather events, social processes, demographic changes, or anything else?
Yes, we have seen, I mean, water costs vary from country to country. It's becoming more expensive, like in water-stressed areas, for example. Like in Chile, where we have a project, water is quite expensive, and we've seen some proposed regulatory changes that are still being discussed that will cause a lot of challenges for us, but we're still monitoring that situation. And in some countries, because I mean, they have plenty, for example, in Ghana, it's not expensive at all, you know?
You know, what's interesting is that we try sometimes, you know, to distinguish between the physical risks and the regulatory risks when we assess companies' exposure. So would you say that regulatory risk is more and more driving, and you put a monetary value to those types of risks internally?
Yes, we do that. But as I said, the regulatory risks that we have, I mean, like we have mapped out for all of operations, some they are high, some they are low, you know? Yes. For example, in Australia, they have stringent regulatory requirements, and most of the mining companies adhere to that. And then we have countries like that are developing countries where they want to put high requirements, but in terms of compliance, you find out that will be exposed. So that is where we have mapped ourselves.
I see. Thank you for that. I wanted to also touch upon, given that we have such a diverse panel with extremely interesting stories and work, about collaboration. What needs to happen in order for all of these stakeholders to work in a more integrated and aligned manner across both sectors and geographies to create impact at scale? What can we do? What can you do to better align actions with impact? Who would like to tackle that question?
Well, I mean,
can I start?
Sorry, you can start. Start, Nosima. I can continue then.
Okay, thank you so much. I mean, as I mentioned, I mean, water is a shared resource. There is a strong really drive to make sure that to work closely with the stakeholders and the catchments where you operate, being it governments, regulators, and other mining houses or other businesses, communities. It is quite important to make sure that the risks identified within the catchment or opportunities are tackled properly. For example, if we don't have water, I'll just make that an example. We operate because we have experienced that challenge, where we experienced like serious drought in one of our operations. And then we made, as the company, solutions for ourselves, but that was not accepted by the communities because they also need water. The challenge that we experienced, they were experiencing. So it's quite important to work in a collaborative manner to make sure that we still continue the business and we don't experience interruptions because of communities that will be making noise around us to say you are taking our water, and at the same time you are making a solution for yourself, you don't cater for us. So it's quite important to understand the risks around us, the opportunities that we can work together to achieve the common goal and purpose. It's quite important. It is quite important. I cannot emphasize more than that.
Fantastic example. Robert?
No, I mean, I was debating almost the same thing a little bit higher up, because I have that view from my perspective, is the system and the map of the system needs to be better defined, so to say, so that we can see through that. Because I mean, I'm investing in companies that invest in other companies that supply something else, but the transparency between those entities and the local government and how it's regulated, that's missing. So as long as we don't have that system map, I think even though we collaborate in different silos, we will be not solving so much, to be honest, because the system hangs together. So that, it's a personal view a little bit, but I think that's something that we need: more transparency, more data, more collaboration, but at the same time, a map of the system, of the dependencies between supply chains, between investors, between customers, between interesting lobby parties. I don't know, but I'm lacking that side, at least.
Yeah, if I may, Kata, I think one thing that is additionally needed is investors need more clarity into what they're actually looking for. A lot of times when you look at the water fund landscape in the US, investors are piling in when they see headlines about droughts, and they're actually looking to make money off of these droughts. They're looking to invest in companies that are going to be profiting off of these water scarcity issues. There are strategies out there that look at it more from some of the angles that we've been talking about, how companies deal with these water-related issues and invest in companies that are positioned better to deal with water-related issues. I think that there's a mix of investors out there right now, and in this relatively novel space, people don't have great definitions about what they want from a water fund. And I think, we as an industry can do a better job of talking about what these strategies do and what they can accomplish in a more realistic way that can set perhaps better expectations for investors in these strategies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Bobby. Let me get back to that, but I just would like to remind our audience that they can send us questions as we arrive to the sort of the last part of this session. You can send it via the chat function here. So just a follow-up question on data, because I did receive a couple of questions related to that. For example, what kind of data should be better standardized? That's one. If anyone wants to tackle that, I have another related to more benchmarking.
It's not so much directly on that, but just a follow-up on what's been said.
Sure.
I actually agree with all my three panelists who spoke before. Yes, the multi-stakeholder approach is ideal, and it's right. It's the way to get things as right as possible so that all the stakeholders are happy. And with Robert, yes, ideally more data and transparency, and with Bobby a little less, but totally agree with you. Just on the first 2 points, though, it's just to be mindful that very different landscapes, waterscapes in different regions. And so different data, different multi-stakeholder approaches work differently. And unfortunately, we're working against the clock. There's now a 50-50 chance that by 2026, we'll pass the 1.5C. So I think at least some, and I don't speak for all of Asia, but the sentiment in discussions I have is that you want to get things as right as possible in that multi-stakeholder approach, and you want more data, but we also have ways that work well enough sometimes and get the job done. And with this looming deadline, and things only going to get exponentially worse after 1.5C, and I mean, even 2C is, a big hope these days. I think we, here we're like, all right, let's muddle through, let's get things done, rather than let's get things perfect and let's get all the data aligned and then decide. And it's a tough balance, everyone, of course, we want the perfect data, and we want as much transparency, but at the same time, we don't have that luxury with the timing that we're working on.
It seems like that we have a selected panelists who all agree upon everything. I wanted to generate a bit more debate, but Robert.
No, I mean, just debating to the data, what type of data we need. I mean, we need company data. I mean, what we are still lacking in, I mean, how many companies in percentage total? I mean, I think it's like 3,000 to 3,500 companies that report to CDP in regard to water management programs. There's lack in data when it comes to strategy, to investment planning, to capex, to opex, to a lot of parts that are still missing. So I mean, if you want data, that type of data I can quantify, I can judge the risks and opportunities, and I can start investing in companies that are actually working well, or actually working from a 1.5 degree scenario, or working from a water sufficiency perspective, where we have water going forward instead of polluting everything. So I mean, quantifiable data connected to strategy, connected to capex and opex. I mean, based on that, I'm still missing a lot of data in regards to that. So just to comment on that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to also agree with Don, but at the same time, we are trying to build estimation models in lack of the non-disclosed publicly available data, and even those estimation models can be unreliable because of the very low amount of accessible data. So I agree, let's do things, but at the same time, it would be good at least to catch up to close the gap between the water and the carbon data. That's what at least I hope the regulation will help from the EU taxonomy and from the SEC side, at least. I don't know if Bobby or Robert would agree to that, but we don't necessarily need regulation to tell us, right, that
sorry, I work in the finance industry, and we should be hating regulation, but I actually love regulation because it comes from some sort of customer or some sort of need. So I do like the EU taxonomy from a perspective where we can map revenue streams, and we can know, okay, if a revenue stream is taxonomy aligned, then we know that it's concluded in a way where it's meets every environmental standard, including water. Now, if you start using that to something else and start to regulate something else on basis of an encyclopedia in regards to revenue stream, then it becomes a problem from a regulatory perspective. But we do need regulation, because I mean, companies do not freely disclose risks, and regulation helps in regards to that, so that we can identify risks that are systemic. And water, climate change, all of the major issues we are talking about today are systemic risks. So you don't necessarily want to disclose as a company if you're not obliged to, because then your share price will probably get hit and the CEO doesn't get its bonus. But a little bit joke, but still it's true. So I love regulation. So I'm hoping that the EU taxonomy, the SEC climate disclosure ruling, and the ISB board will come to a conclusion where we have a double materiality type of reporting, because otherwise we can't solve this.
Mm-hmm. Bobby, where do you see the landscape in the next few years?
I see it continuing to advance. I think that just in the past 2 years, we've really seen a lot of progress in elevating this issue. I think the droughts in the American Southwest and really throughout the world more broadly really are triggering some pretty jarring headlines that are getting investors, policymakers much more aware of these issues. I think us that are a little closer to this issue have recognized the problems and like the water risks that are inherent. We've known this for a while, but they're entering the zeitgeist now. And as they continue to gain a voice, I think that you will see more regulations, more disclosure requirements, and more importantly, I think you're going to see investors demanding that. You're actually going to see that sort of organic demand for these types of risks to be disclosed, and ultimately, I think that is going to be the most important aspect. Without that sort of investor demand for these types of this type of information, it can kind of fall flat and not really be a relevant data point. But with investors really pressing for this kind of change, I think that ultimately that will lead to more good.
Do you see any special appetite for disruptive technologies like AI? There's a question regarding startups or companies that work with those types of technologies to solve water problems, challenges.
I think there's some really interesting venture capital funds focused on water specific issues. And I think over time, you're going to see some of these really disruptive technologies come to market. And I think that's when investing in the water theme might become more tangible for public equity investors. There's some really interesting technology that's being developed, but right now it is largely constrained to the private markets. And once some of those companies start going through the life cycle and mature into public companies, there's really some interesting potential for public equity investors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Someone is writing that startups versus larger companies compliance can be an issue. How you can balance bigger companies versus startup companies to comply with standards.
I can answer that. I mean, it depends. I mean, larger companies have more resources to put into regulatory reporting, but at the same time, as a startup company, you might be not reporting from a regulatory perspective, but you still need to abide by the rules and regulation that is out there. So the only problem there is the discrepancy in regards to ESG data providers, basically, that they don't compound your information. But I, as an active manager, go down to the startup level and, okay, this is the theme that I'm looking for, let's say water efficiency. If you have a startup versus a big company, I'm not just looking at ESG data on a superficial level, what is reported. I'm looking at, okay, what type of product, how it helps, how much impact it creates. So you're looking at it from a different way. So yes, you will have that regulatory gap on the risk side in our compounding score as well. But that's what makes it interesting to be an active asset manager, is that you can dig down on that side and identify that side. But yeah, there are some problems on that side. But I, as an investor, would not discriminate a startup if I can invest into it. And Bobby was waiting to that as well. I think that's where the interesting part comes in, the venture cap. That's where you make the real impact right now. There are some spin-offs coming out here and there, both in Europe and in the States, but it's still, the money is still there on the really revolutionary technology. But we are getting there, and that's why we are investing in enabling activities with larger companies, Bobby, so that we can somehow tap into that, if that's an excuse.
Thank you for making the explanation and distinction. I'd just like to remind everyone that later on during our finance track, we will have some very interesting breakout sessions where some disruptive technologies are going to be displayed, and the difference between disruptive and evolutionary water tech. We are coming to the end of this session, so I'd just like to wrap this up by giving the floor to everyone to say their last words, key messages, or what they distilled from the conversation. Don.
Sure. Thanks, Kath, and everyone. It's been great to join this session. One thing that we've been focusing on at CWR over the last couple of years, and when you're talking ESG and you break down the E, and water becomes one of the growing parts of it, but normally everyone's focused on energy and so on, but we're still mainly looking at freshwater when you're talking about risks and everything, but salt water has become a growing issue, and sea level rise So while we're all while we're saying we want more data and transparency, you might as well check that in there now and you know, try and get everyone on the same page, because we need to look at water holistically. So it's fresh water and it's salt water, and it's trying to get those not in the water sector and world to understand how much water really means for the climate. You know, climate change is water and how we're going to feel it. So that's my last words. Thanks.
Thank you, Dawn. Nosimo?
Okay, thank you so much, Kata, for the chance once again. For me, what I can say is thank you so much for the invite. It was really a good discussion, especially, I mean, from investor perspective and the challenges that as the industry, I mean, face, especially when it comes to really engaging our supply chain to get this information so that we can disclose. Some companies have managed to do that because of this nature of their business, but we have been challenging, but we're trying to do something, but it has been a challenge to understand in terms of the water use in our suppliers go to that level. We just review their reports and ask questions so that we can respond to some of the questions that were being asked. That's the honest truth. And it's a challenge. I don't want to lie. It's a challenge to get that information in detail. It's not only on water, but in most of the ESG related KPIs that we want to understand so that we can work with them like nicely. But what we have done, we just include a clause in our policies that they need to adhere to our requirements and the standards, and make sure that when we do the selection, we check if ever they adhere to those. But in terms of getting like more details, it's a bit of a challenge. But it was good to understand how they fall. Yes.
Thank you so much. We have really half a minute left, so I'd just like to give one word back to Bobby and Robert for their last words.
Bobby, I talk too much anyway, so.
Yeah, I can go quick and just say, you know, investing in water is something that I think everyone here can agree with. I think just be very careful when you're doing so. Do the manager due diligence, look at what the strategy holds, and really get to know how they're approaching investing in the space. It's not a one-size-fits-all way of investing. It can be right for some portfolios, but just be very careful and understand the types of strategies that are employed.
Thank you, Robert.
Quick, I mean, I do believe that the financial market is one of the key parts of the climate equation, and we need to be there. We are trying to please too many people right now on too many different fronts. So this depth that we need in different cases might not be there, but have patience with us, because we are trying to help in this.
Okay, thank you so much. We really arrived at the end of this session. I appreciate and thank all the panelists for their participation and contribution. I really enjoyed the conversation. We will continue. Thank you for the audience to join this session. We are going to take a very brief technical break again to switch to our next, to continue our program. So please stay with us. And in the meantime, I will ask our next session contributors to come turn their cameras on. I'm just double checking that we have everyone.
Hello, can you hear me, Kata?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Can you see me?
Yes, I can also hear and see you. You can also rename yourself, Jackie. Okay, great. I think we are all set. So welcome back, everyone. For those of you who are joining, we continue our World Water Week program. Please note that all the lines we intended to mute, but you're welcome to send us questions during the presentations, and the recording will be made available through Civi. So the title of this session is From Lithium Mining to Tesla, Addressing Water Across EVs Supply Chain. We decided to address the supply chain of electric vehicles because they are imperative part of the energy transition through reducing greenhouse gas emissions and delivering a sustainable transport system. But their whole supply chain needs to be considered in order to avoid creating environmental and social issues while trying to achieve the necessary climate goals. So this session will present case studies from the electric vehicle supply chain by Morningstar Sustainalytics researchers, including lithium mining in Latin America, semiconductors in Taiwan, and Tesla. So there are a wide range of current and emerging water risk factors that could result in financially material risk, social impact, environmental impact, or stranded assets. Broad categories include physical risks, regulatory risks, reputational and market risks, or technological risks, some of which my colleagues will explain during their presentations. But so just to say, in our research, we do try and distinguish between business model-based risk and corporate level risk, which are driven by geographic location, recognizing the truly localized nature of water as a shared resource. So with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Alina Olaru, who's an ESG research lead analyst for transportation and infrastructure at Morningstar Sustainalytics. She will provide a brief overview of the key topic of this session today. Alina, over to you.
Thank you, Kata. So on the next slide, I do have some of the details I will be addressing regarding the electric vehicle supply chains and the connected water risks. First, what I would like to mention is that the trend we see in the automobile sector related to the transition to electric vehicles, so to EVs, easily derives from the global trend concerning the transition to net zero emissions, so emission focused. Now the transition to EVs has been accelerated by various factors, one of them being the increased regulatory pressure that we see worldwide. An example here would be the upcoming EU legislation that will ultimately ban internal combustion vehicles in 2035. While this trend will drastically reduce tailpipe emission, it does present other challenges when it comes to environmental impact, some of which are connected to the supply chain. What implication does the transition to EV have on the supply chain in connection to water, and what risks this also brings along? Well, here we can focus on two main areas. First would be the increased dependence on semiconductor chips. I think the chip shortage induced by the pandemic, which severely impacted the entire automotive sector, right, with the production halts and delivery delays, highlights how dependent automakers are on this critical component. Now, this dependence is now further exacerbated by the increased demand in EVs. Due to the fact that an EV requires double the amount of components in terms of chips compared to conventional vehicles. Now, as automakers rely heavily on suppliers that produce these chips, they're also exposed to risks related to water scarcity in their supply chain. This is because the production of chips require large volumes of ultra-pure water for the wafer fabrication process. And what's more, in addition to that, we also have many of these facilities manufacturing chips located in arid or semi-arid regions, especially in the Asia-Pacific region. So this leads to an increased environmental impact in terms of water, as well as further exposure to related risks. When it comes to the increased dependence on lithium, here we can see that the electrification of the global automotive sector is also driving the demand for lithium-ion batteries. According to some estimations, we are also expecting that batteries to account to over 90% of the lithium demand by 2030, And we also know that lithium is a mineral which has a very water intensive production. Now, what also complements that in terms of water risk is that companies producing lithium operate mainly in water scarce regions, such as the lithium triangle, comprised of Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia. So this lithium rush that we see is taking place with significant consequences on the local communities, as well as on the water resources, mainly due to the fact that the extraction process of lithium can lower the groundwater level. And this is happening in already water scarce regions. So basically it contributes to more desertification, and yeah, it can ultimately lead to water shortages for those local communities. As we can see, there are important water-related risks that need to be addressed, and worth highlighting here as a last point from my side would be that the rapid transition to EVs is an emerging trend, and we also recognize this and follow closely. And although it has major benefits in terms of the contribution to reduce emission, that's for sure, does not exclude that it has other types of environmental impacts that are brought along with the transition. Now, I am pleased to introduce our next topic speaker, Anna Bonomi, Morningstar Sustainalytics ESG Research Manager for the healthcare and chemicals industry. Over to you, Anna.
Great. Thank you very much, Alina. And hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. In the next minutes or so, I will dive deep into the early part of the electric vehicles supply chain and really zoom in into the extraction and production of lithium, which is, as Alina already mentioned, is a crucial metal for developing batteries for electric vehicles that also comes with some important environmental and social challenges all related to water. Moving to the next slide, at the very early stage of the electric vehicle supply chain, we can really find companies that are extracting, processing raw materials needed for developing batteries, and this really includes also lithium. And the largest company that are extracting and refining lithium are all included within the chemical industry, with some example being Albemarle, SQM, and Ganfeng. So lithium is really a metal that was formed during the Big Bang, and it's used for manufacturing few products. And this includes also medicine, general batteries, and as I mentioned, batteries for electric vehicles. The demand for this metal has been substantially increasing already compared to 5 years ago, and is just projected to keep on increasing over the next years, expected already to double by 2024. And this is, of course, directly linked to the increased demand for electric vehicles, as Alina just mentioned. While lithium is a crucial raw material for the transition to a low carbon economy, its extraction has been linked to important social and environmental issues, because the extraction of these material really requires significant amount of water, approximately 500,000 gallons per ton of lithium. And the majority of lithium extraction is happening in already water stress area, as again, Alina mentioned, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina, the so-called lithium triangle, which we will look in the next slide. And because lithium extraction is a water intense process happening in area where water scarcity is an important problem, such activities contribute to water scarcity in already water stressed region, which is also consequently decreasing the amount of water available for local communities as well as local agriculture. So the lithium, about the lithium triangle, 75% of the lithium resources are really located in Latin America, and more specifically in this part called lithium triangle, which includes Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. This area is one of the driest places in the world, and companies extracting lithium from this area not only contribute to lower the ground level in an already water scarce area, and this is really contributing to deforestation, water shortage for local community, local agricultural activities as well. Just to give you an example of the scale of this issue, in Salar de Atacama, which is in Chile, lithium extraction has consumed already over 65% of the region water supply. So because those lithium extraction is directly linked to important social and environmental challenges or related to or connected to water, lithium producers all face increased risk due to increased regulatory scrutiny. Companies may not be able to obtain water permit, or they have to stop production for a certain amount of time, as well as they might face community opposition, leading to delays in new project or disruption in already existing operation. Two main companies actually control the extraction of lithium in the lithium triangle, and those are Albemarle, which is a US-based company, and SQM, the company that we will see later on in the presentation. Moving to the next slide, as I mentioned in the previous slide, lithium producer, due to the nature of their business, they really face significantly higher exposure to water-related risk than traditional, especially compared to traditional chemical company. Therefore, Sustainalytics has really created a model for quantitatively assessing risk exposure that those companies are facing due to water risk. And the risk exposure factors that have been defined for assessing exposure to this risk are, first of all, the revenue dependency on lithium, so that we have an idea on the amount of revenue which can be at stake. And then by using external data sources, we try to quantify physical, geographic, and regulatory risk faced by companies. Then we look at some water-related metrics, including the percentage of water that has been consumed. We compare the company water intensity with the median at the industry level, so that we have an idea on how companies performs compared to peers. We look at the reliance on several types of water, especially fresh and groundwater, and the type of water used, as well as the location, of course. Then we look also at the product itself and how water intense the product is. And in case specifically for lithium, it's really mainly dependent on the type of extraction used, which is hard rock compared to brine extraction, with brine extraction being more water intense. While in an ideal world, we would be able to fully scale up this model across all companies, due to lack of disclosure of water-related metrics, we had to add a qualitative assessment to overcome data availability issues. In the next slide, I will really walk you through how we assess one of the largest lithium producer, SQM. So SQM is a commodity producer with the headquarters in Chile. The company is one of the leading players in the lithium extraction market, with a 90% of the market share. And the company derives over 33% of the revenue from lithium. And this is expected to increase in the next years, projected to increase. Most of the company lithium extraction operation are in Chile, even though the company is also trying to expand and develop other hard rock lithium project in Australia. Looking closely at the company data, through the lens which are reported on the right part of the slides, with the lens of our proprietary risk exposure model to water risk, which I just explained in the previous slide, we noticed that the company increased exposure to water risk is mainly due to the fact that, first of all, the company consumed 97% of the water that extract, and all of this water consumed comes from extremely high hydric stress area. While the company operation only rely on 5% on, the vast majority relies on groundwater, which is critically important as supply a large proportion of water for drinking, sanitation, agriculture, irrigation, and therefore food production. Despite the strong disclosure and program in place by the company for reducing water usage, which includes target for substantially reducing water, the company really lack a more forward-looking approach to fundamentally tackle this issue and therefore find a long-term solution to the lithium crisis. For example, there is no evidence that the company is investing in R&D activity for looking for a substitute metal to lithium, which can be iron, aluminium. Yeah, so this is the end of looking at the lithium producer. I'm pleased to introduce our next topic speaker, Jennifer Vieno, ESG Research Manager for the Technology, Media, Telecommunication and Sustainalytics Morningstar. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Anna. And I know that's a mouthful. So in this section, I'll focus on another major input in the EV supply chain, semiconductor chips. So semiconductor chips have been called the brains of modern electronics and are an essential component in electronic devices. As Alina mentioned, EVs require double the number of chips when compared to a typical vehicle. Chips in vehicles are used for various functions such as cars' radio touchscreens, air conditioning systems, airbags, ABS, and stabilization systems across so many more functions. The semiconductor industry is split into two main types of companies, those that design the chips and those that manufacture or fabricate these chips, which we call foundries or fabs. So the semiconductor manufacturing process is dependent on a large amount of high quality water. Water serves a critical role at several steps during the manufacturing process to rinse off impurities and prevent the chips from becoming contaminated. The water used in this process needs to be purified to ultra pure water standards. That's water so pure it's actually considered an industrial solvent. It's estimated that it takes about 1,500 gallons of tap water to make 1,000 gallons of ultra pure water. And the demand for chips is only expected to continue growing, requiring more water. McKinsey & Company forecasts that the semiconductor industry will grow to an industry market value of over $1 trillion by 2030. 20% of this demand is predicted to be driven by the automotive industry. Next slide, please. So some of the risk drivers to the quantity and quality of water supply include the location of fabs. Fabs located in areas where water is scarcer are more exposed to water risk than those where water is more abundant. As well, location can dictate the quality of water available. A second driver is the amount of competition from other domestic and industrial users that there are for these water resources. As well, climate change has been driving water risks by increasing the number of adverse weather events and creating changes in rain patterns and droughts. This has created water availability issues in regions that have typically not been considered to have such issues, such as Taiwan, which I'll discuss in the case study. These water risks expose companies to financially material risk if they must limit their production capacity or if they experience disruptions in production. So if their production is limited or disrupted, these companies would be unable to satisfy their customer demands. And as a reminder, fabs produce components used by many other companies. For example, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC, manufactured over 12,000 different products for 535 customers in 2021 across a variety of products. As such, any production issues at these fabs could result in issues across those other supply chains. Companies could also see costs increase if they are required to find alternative sources of water to satisfy their needs, or if water prices or taxes are applied to their water supply. As well, there is the risk of increased stringent regulation and government-imposed limits on the amount of water these companies can source. So the table on the right shows the breakdown of global wafer fabrication capacity. And so wafer just basically, it serves as the base of a chip, where the chip is implanted into the wafer. So 75% of wafer fabrication capacity is concentrated in East Asia and China, areas that have experienced water scarcity issues, and as such expose these fabs that are located in these areas to water-related risks. I'd like to focus on Taiwan for a moment, which is represented by the orange color. So Taiwan accounts for 20% of total global fabrication capacity, but also represents 92% of the most advanced chips in the world. So next slide, please. In 2021, Taiwan experienced its worst drought in over 50 years. Taiwan historically has been one of the rainiest places in the world, where seasonal typhoons provided with much of its water reserves. However, in 2020, no typhoons hit the island and there was little rain. Taiwan officials and scholars have warned that water scarcity could become a more persistent problem in the years to come because of climate change. One theory is that as global temperatures rise, typhoons will become stronger over the Pacific Ocean, but also more likely to change course before reaching Taiwan. So during the drought, the government halted water supplies to some parts of the island and placed restrictions on supply and usage of water by industrial companies, including fabs. One of the government's most sweeping measures was actually a halt on irrigation, which impacted farmers across the country. Let's see how TSMC, one of the world's largest producers of semiconductors with fabs in Taiwan, was impacted by this drought. TSMC stated that there was no material impact to its business or operations during the drought, meaning it did not have to experience a large decrease in production. The company did this by implementing its business continuity plan, which included drought contingency measures, which are listed on the right of the screen. These included water conservation measures, the use of more secured water sources, including water supplied by trucks. It collaborated with the Fukuda Water Recycling Center to reduce its tap water consumption, collecting discharged recycled water from the center for reuse at its facilities. Note that while the company indicated there were no material impacts on its production, it did not explicitly state the costs of ensuring these alternative sources of water. Next slide, please. So TSMC's business continuity plans helped ensure continuous production during this drought. It's great to see the company was able to deal with this water availability issue through its contingency plans. However, with water becoming scarcer, there also needs to be a focus on how these companies will reduce their dependence on water resources. I'd like to highlight 3 measures that TSMC is taking to tackle this issue. So the first is its long-term target of reducing per unit consumption by 30% by 2030 from its 2010 baseline. It also has set interim goals towards this long-term goal, which we consider as best practice, given these allow us to follow the progress made towards meeting the end target. The company has also set a goal of replacing more than 60% of water resources with reclaimed water by 2030. Water reclamation is the process of converting municipal To achieve this goal, it's collaborating with government and is building an industrial waste discipline. Hi, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes, Jennifer, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. I hope I wasn't gone for very long. So the last thing I was talking about was the reclamation of water. And so, as I mentioned, they are creating this industrial wastewater treatment plant, which is expected to meet about half of its daily supplies, daily water requirements. A third initiative is that TSMC shares its water saving experience and expertise with other semiconductor companies to help promote water conservation and help ensure a long-term balance of supply and demand for water in Taiwan. So while TSMC has put in place many measures to reduce its use of fresh water, its overall consumption has increased due to the increase in production and stricter requirements for clean water from advanced processes. As mentioned, experts expect more persistent water issues in Taiwan due to climate change. And so there's actually nothing stopping the government from halting more of its water supplies in the future if that's the case. This is an industry that will continue to face water-related risks, given its dependence on a large quantity of high-quality water, where production is located in areas with water scarcity issues, and demand is expected to grow, driven by industries such as EVs. And now I'd like to pass the presentation along to Jackie Cook, Morningstar Sustainalytics Director of Stewardship, Product Strategy, and Development. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and lovely to be on this panel. So digesting the insights shared by Alina, Anna, and Jennifer, it's clear that water has a very clear-cut investor case, especially when we look at supply chains. Water risk and water stewardship have company-specific and sector-specific relevance for investment decision-making. But as with climate risk, water risk has broader relevance for financial stability. And as Anna was pointing out, water scarcity made worse by climate change, can impact economic development through multiple feedback loops. For investors, this means that divestment won't remove your portfolio level water risks. So we move up the EV supply chain, and we consider what are investors doing to address these risks. And I'm going to present a really interesting case at its 2022 AGM, which happened earlier this month. Investors shone a spotlight on Tesla's water-related risks and sought to influence Tesla's water use, transparency, and governance. So moving to the next slide, before we consider the specifics of this initiative, let's briefly consider how do investors influence companies with their AGM votes. The votes that they have by virtue of being shareholders in public companies listed on public equity markets. And does this help? Especially when much of a company's supply chain is beyond the voting reach of public equity markets and their investors. So using their voting rights, shareholders have a toolbox of strategies that they can use to influence companies that they invest in. And in the US and in other developed markets, they can file a shareholder resolution to be voted alongside, excuse me, to be voted alongside management's ballot measures at general shareholder meetings. Resolutions can pressure companies to engage in a dialogue with investors, or they can add momentum to ongoing dialogues. Resolutions also serve to frame the issue and, as we'll discuss in a moment, offer insights to the market about specific risks. Once the issue goes to vote, the vote outcome is a useful indicator of investor sentiment and therefore a closely watched market signal. Increasingly, investors are collaborating via investor coalitions to collectivize their influence. Think of the Climate Action 100+ coalition. The series and the PRI have in the past coordinated collaborative investor-led initiatives on water engagements. Sustainalytics offers an ESG voting advisory service called the ESG Voting Policy Overlay to help investors make informed proxy voting decisions on the most strategically relevant ballot items for advancing sustainable business practice. It's a relatively new offering incubated within Sustainalytics' seasoned stewardship services business, and our approach is to create continuity between proxy voting and the engagement that best leverages shareholders' voting rights. So moving to the next slide, let's get to Tesla. There were 13 items for shareholders to vote on Tesla's AGM, Tesla's ballot that was voted earlier in August. 8 of these were proposed by Tesla's own shareholders. And number 13 on the ballot was a resolution asking the board to assess and report to shareholders on the company's water risk exposure linked to climate change and placing particular emphasis on quantitative metrics. This is the first time Tesla's faced a water-related shareholder resolution, so it's significant, not counting the votes that Elon Musk controls. This resolution earned close to 50% support from shareholders. Typically, support levels above 30% cause management to act on the issue because typically management recommends against the resolution, as it did in this case. And of course, with Elon Musk being on the board, his shares would have been voted against the issue, and that's why I control for his shares when I report this vote outcome. We recommended to our investor clients that they support the resolution, and I'll briefly explain why in the next slide. Tesla's the world's, let's go to the next slide. There we go. Tesla's the world's largest EV manufacturer by 2021 sales. It has considerable power over its supply chain, and it's well positioned to drive industry best practice. On the other hand, if it fails to take timely action, the scale of its operations, especially at gigafactory sites, place communities, local economies, and investors at risk. And of course, considering the scale of its supply chain, those risks are amplified. If we examine the detailed requests provide that the shareholder included in the resolution, we can maybe break them down into 3 groupings. The resolution requests facility-specific water use and targets, water risk assessments and policies, and pre- and post-siting. So this is facility-specific. And this is quantitative targets. And this is in line with a general investor trend to ask for more actionable, quantitative, specific targets and transparency into risk mitigation efforts. Secondly, it also asks for information on how Tesla assesses supply chain water risk and engages with supply chain partners. This is significant. From the investor perspective, getting Tesla to act on supply chain risks not only addresses business model risks, its own business model risks, but extends investor reach beyond public equity markets to smaller firms in other markets. The investor, as I said in the beginning, can't always divest away from water risk. And so investors and the investors that we represent in our voting recommendations are exposed to risk across the market. Furthermore, and thirdly, the resolution asks for clarity on governance mechanisms. And this is an area that we put particular emphasis on. This is where investors can strengthen corporate accountability via board oversight, incentives, and transparency. Some of the regions in which Tesla has located its gigafactories are experiencing unprecedented water stress. Texas, California, Nevada in the US, Shanghai in China, and Berlin-Brandenburg in Germany. So board level capacity to understand and to take proactive steps to mitigate water's multifaceted risks, to link management performance metrics and incentives to these risks and their mitigation is a necessary, not a sufficient, but a necessary condition for maintaining the company's social license to operate. And with this, I'll pass you back to Kata.
Thank you so much. Fantastic case studies. We are going to start a Q&A section here. Let me remind our audience to type in their questions for our speakers. Jackie, I'll just start with you, given you were the last to speak. What is the evidence that shareholder resolutions work?
Thanks, Kata. That is a great question, and it's a question that we grapple with because this is the evidence that we have to present to our clients. So one of the ways in which we make shareholder resolutions work is we use them, we leverage them to engage with companies, and so they give substance to engagements, and it's through engagements that investors are really able to work with companies to develop solutions, to understand the problems and develop solutions. There are academic studies showing that, and I referred briefly to one of them, that when 30% of shareholders support a shareholder resolution, that management generally acts on the resolution, and that's a study that BlackRock conducted a couple of years ago. When more than 50% of shareholders vote in support of a resolution, in 94% of cases, management fulfills the request of the resolution. So there's a good deal of evidence that it works both directly as well as indirectly, in terms of bringing companies to the engagements, into dialogue with investors.
Okay, so going back to Tesla's case. Why would a company like Tesla, with a dominant insider shareholder, respond to investors' request for water, any other ESG measures?
Tesla, so Tesla has shareholders. They have a dominant insider, insider who may not protect entirely the company against a shareholder revolt, but certainly provides a bit of a buffer. So, relative to a company that does not have a strong insider holding, shareholders have a bit more of a challenge. But companies have other stakeholders, and shareholder resolutions speak to those stakeholders as well, and so Tesla is very much dependent on consumer sentiment. And, and so the conversation that started through shareholder resolutions and through investors engaging with companies extends to other stakeholder groups. And I think that's where a lot of the pressure comes. You can think of the investor pressure through proxy voting and engagement as part of a social movement that can draw in other stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. So just as a last question, there are other types of shareholder resolutions addressing water risks, right? Could you?
That's correct. Yes. So actually, and water-related shareholder resolutions have been on the ballots for maybe for more than 2 decades, or around 2 decades, and often it's food and agriculture companies. But we did see another resolution on Alphabet's ballot this year that again resonates with the Tesla resolution, in that it asks the company for facility-specific quantitative metrics relating to its data centers. So again, you know, investors are getting specific. You know, their objectives now, or the constraints within which they're working, are becoming clearer, and so they need this data.
Thank you, Jackie. While we're still waiting for some questions, I'll continue to ask. Anna, let's turn to you regarding lithium production. Are there different, so production can have different water footprints. Could you elaborate further on that and explain the difference between brine extraction and lithium produced through the hard rock mining that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for this question, Kata. So basically, as of now, lithium is mainly extracted through two different techniques. One, as you mentioned, is the brine extraction, which is mainly happening in Latin America for the type of just for the conformation of the earth, because there are salt deposits and basically lithium is extracted from those deposits. And then there is hard rock mining extraction. So basically extraction done with mining activities. And this is mainly happening in Australia as well as in the US. So I would say that there are substantial difference between the two. So brine extraction is much more water intense than hard rock mining. However, hard rock mining is much more energy intense than brine extraction. So there is an increased amount of greenhouse emitted during the mining. And within hard rock mining, because it's a proper mining process, there is an increased, I would say that there is an increased also health and safety, occupational health and safety risk for employees that are working compared to brine extraction. When it comes specifically to water, as I mentioned, brine extraction is much more water intense. And the problem is not just only that it's more water intense, but it's happening in places that are already where water is already an issue. So this is basically the main issue. Hard rock mining is also, we will see more and more projects developing in Australia, in the US, and those countries have also, those countries also are facing also issues related to water. So the problem, lithium and water scarcity problem, is just expected to increase over time, unfortunately, until the moment that we don't find a substantial, like a long-term solution.
Thank you, Anna, for elaborating further. I mean, then it's multiple things that we need data and more transparency on, right? Not just the geographic location, but also the extraction type of the lithium. So we received a really good question related to the whole supply chain. So maybe Alina, you can try to tackle this one. What role do you see downstream companies like Tesla playing in mitigating the water risk and impacts at lithium mine sites? Anna, Alina, what are your takes? How do we see, also from Sustainalytics perspective, how do we see the supply chain related issues and the materiality of that being recognized in our assessment?
Related questions, maybe I can also support. So, for example, this is something that companies need to look into, as well as focus on technologies that would first and foremost require less materials, because the technology is available, especially in terms of batteries that use lithium. And there are also other options, right, that we see companies could approach. One of them being battery recycling. So basically, that would reduce the need for raw materials, and will increase the use of already used materials. So that probably is an indirect way companies could support in that sense at first.
Okay, great. And we do recognize this trend coming, right? So we are also looking to this trend more and more. hence also the presentation on the whole supply chain. We are nearly at the end of this session, but Jennifer, would you want to take one last short question regarding sustainable water management standards and certifications that companies could use to enhance their water resource management, to provide assurances and claims of good water stewardship among semiconductors?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So the one standard and certification that I'm aware of is the Alliance for Water Stewardship. So basically, the standard is intended to be applicable to any type and size of organization in any location, and it's a framework for major water users to understand their water use and the impacts of that water use. And so users can implement this standard without certification, which will help these companies address their water challenges. However, certification really demonstrates the site has successfully completed each steps of the standard and can help provide assurance to external and internal stakeholders that their claims of good water stewardship are credible. And there are 3 levels of certification. They have a core, gold, and platinum. And these sites are actually subject to successful annual surveillance audits. TSMC has actually adopted and followed the AWS standards and has successfully been getting its sites certified. And in 2019, it received the platinum level certification for a few of its sites and has been moving towards that ever since.
Great, thank you so much. I hope Matthew Howard is on the line already. He's going to come up within our next session. I hope he's smiling right now. But so thank you for mentioning that. We have really arrived now to the end of this session. I would like to thank Alina, Anna, Jennifer, Jackie for their participation and their extremely insightful contributions. We really addressed the questions: what are the key and relevant water and related risks and impacts within the EV supply chain, and how do companies manage them, and how these can be measured at the site and corporate levels and possibly even beyond. So, and mentioning tools that are available for investors and shareholders who want to influence more sustainable outcomes within their portfolio companies. So thank you. Thank you for your contributions. Again, we are doing a very quick, short technical break. Up next is our breakout session, so please stay with us. We continue shortly.
Hello, Kata.
Okay, wonderful. I just got the note that everyone's on board. Fantastic. So I don't know if we have new joiners, but let me start by saying welcome back, everyone. This is Morningstar Sustainalytics World Water Week program. We enter now into the breakout session part. I'm extremely excited about. We curated breakout rooms and facilitators specifically to address ESG through multiple issues, lenses like water stewardship, like active ownership, and like disruptive technologies and ideas. So on the screen right now, you can see the 3 room options available for you to choose from. One is Bias per Action Room presenting Sustainalytics thematic engagement program. And the second is a Change at Scale room focusing on water stewardship and data verification. And the third is the Stream Water Punks room showcasing disruptive technologies and ideas. I hope you all will make up your mind very quickly, because we ask you to choose one and join the discussion. And after about half an hour, you're going to come back to plenary and the facilitators will report back on each theme. I hope you're ready. So let's go.
Kata?
Please
How
go.
How do we pick the rooms?
Yeah, it's going to come up. My colleague is going to start the process and we will just pick them, if I understand correctly, how this Zoom works.
So you will push us into room 3?
My understanding
You
is,
should, sorry, Kata, I'm just going to jump in.
Please.
You should have a pop-up that just popped up on your screen to say to choose your room. If it did not pop up on you, I will assign you right now.
Oh, okay.
If you are still on the line and currently unassigned, please feel free to unmute yourself and let me know what room you'd like to be assigned to.
Room 2.
Room 3 for me, please.
I'm sorry, if you could say your name and then tell me.
Elena, room 2.
Elena, room 2. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Yuri. I have interest in 1.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Kata, do you want to go to a room?
yes, I will go to a room. Will you be able to pull me back?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Where do you want to go?
Yeah, I'll just join.
See, Jennifer, Tom, anyone else want to go to a room?
Okay. So back to plenary from the 3 breakout rooms. Welcome back, everyone. Very interesting discussions. I was floating around each room a little bit. I very much look forward to reporting back. So I have asked all facilitators to streamline their summary. So they are expected to cover a short summary about their breakout, some problem and solution statement, something about scaling, if the solution is already scaled or planned to be, and the message. What is your key message and who needs to hear it? So let's start with you, Dana. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, sorry, I'm trying to gather all my thoughts here. So I guess maybe sort of what we discussed about would be that, so I'm an engagement manager and I'm focused on environmental issues here at Sustainalytics. So I shared our localized water management engagement, which is a proactive investor engagement. And we conduct dialogues with companies operating in the Tietê River Basin in Brazil and the integrated Val River system in South Africa. And these conversations sort of leverage the expertise of Sustainalytics and the investor status as owners or potential owners. And we focus our discussions on a set of topics such as water governance and integrated water resources, with the goal of sort of improving water stewardship at a company, basin, and societal level. One of the problems that we identified, again, is just lack of data. And so active ownership is definitely a tool that investors can use to gain more insights into a company. Scaling is definitely an issue because each of these dialogues requires us to review all of a company's public disclosure, and we have to tailor each of these agendas to the company's specific challenges. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all engagement. We actually have to read all the documents and make bespoke suggestions to each company. And on the investor side, also not all investors are the same. And so Russell highlighted, sort of its process and how it goes through and how in the end, it's trying to incorporate water risk into its investment portfolio, but it doesn't have enough information at a company level to actually do that, to integrate it at a portfolio level. So, active ownership is just one way that it's using to sort of, do its due diligence and gain more information on the companies that it does pick. And so I would say maybe our key message is that through active ownership, I think investors really can play a role in supporting solutions to the global water crisis, encouraging companies to secure water supply while also contributing to SDG 6. So demonstrating concern for water as a material issue and a societal good can accelerate change. It's just sort of one step on a long road to integrated and lasting responses on a basin level and beyond.
Thank you, Dana. Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Kata. And also, Will and Tom, I consider myself an honorary water punk.
And you are, Matt.
Thanks, even though I couldn't join the session. So we covered actually quite a bit of ground in our 30 minutes, just in terms of the short summary. I think we kind of laid out three broad issues as it relates to water stewardship, and we kind of focused in because obviously that's a broad topic. So we talked about this phenomenon now that we've got new companies, new entrants into water stewardship world, if you will, making claims, setting new targets and goals, expressing new water strategies. And we have a lot of stakeholders out there wondering, what are these targets? What are these goals? What do these claims mean? And how do we know as stakeholders, as a community, how do we know that those companies are doing the right things with water stewardship at the right times and at the right places? And so you've got this happening right now. So, it's carbon now, water next, and we're kind of seeing this, if you will, wave build for action in terms of water stewardship. So one of the issues, besides needing a better understanding and more credibility and transparency around claims, is companies that are used to doing carbon and GHG reductions, waste reduction, packaging, et cetera, kind of bringing those analytical frameworks to water stewardship. It's not a one-to-one transition from analyzing some of those sustainability issues to getting into water stewardship. And so it's kind of tripping some companies up and inadvertently leading them down the path of, again, maybe articulating some goals and targets that might not necessarily be directly responsive to how water is material in their operations and across their enterprise. And so as a result of kind of this background, this framework of phenomena happening right now in water world, we talked about the idea and the importance of verification and certification to water claims. And unfortunately, within water stewardship world, it's pretty limited right now in terms of the options that are out there for verification and certification. I think most people know about the AWS standard. Great standard, very site specific. You have to go facility by facility or farm by farm. And there really isn't too much out there in terms of looking at the enterprise or the supply chain or the value chain. We've got great signaling from things like the CEO Water Mandate and the Water Resilience Coalition when companies join there. But then again, what's that through line on water stewardship from the boardroom to the shop floor? And can verification play a role in between the CEO and site level water stewardship? So we talked a little bit about a new program out there that we have at the Water Council called WAVE, which provides enterprise-wide verification. So we heard about the importance just from stakeholders specifically that, verification really adds some level of confirmation and comfort, if you will, with what companies are saying they're doing on water stewardship. Customers want this, so it's not just community members and nonprofits, investors, asset managers, et cetera. And so companies can really look to certification and verification to help differentiate themselves and differentiate their brands. And then we heard specifically then in terms of, okay, so we've got these problems out there, verification, certification, potentially a solution. How do you scale this? How do you get companies to really engage on water stewardship, especially what I would consider, companies that aren't necessarily in the obvious water intensive sectors? And so we heard a little bit from Mike at Nutrien talking about how they've accelerated their water stewardship program for their company, which has thousands of retail outlets, also has manufacturing, very extensive value chain. And so again, for them, the importance really of developing a pathway and a strategic approach to get them to set that water strategy, set those meaningful targets and goals that are responsive to uses and risks. And then at the end of the day, report that in a credible and transparent fashion in ESG frameworks or other frameworks that are out there. So we really covered a lot of ground. We got some good questions, but I think that's kind of the gist of our conversation.
Fantastic summary. Thank you so much, Matt. Last but not least, over to the water punks, Will and Tom.
Okay, I want to start by defining water punks and why we invited Cody and Victoria and regretfully not Matt. But so for us, a water punk is someone who has a bias for action and rejects the status quo. And that's a really good segue into discussing what both of them are doing and the impact that they're having on the sector, and also some of the challenges that they face in really pushing back hard on the status quo. So Victoria Fido, she is challenging the status quo around non-revenue water, accepting that we get up to 50% leakage, in quotes, from utilities is just not acceptable, period. And that's what she's focused on. And Cody is appalled that people do not have universal access to safe drinking water. It's not democratized. And that's what Source is delivering. And some of the takeaways, one is, yeah, the technology is great, absolutely brilliant, but they're having an impact at scale. And these are not pilot projects, and they're delivering solutions at scale through innovative business models. And Fido is doing that by de-risking the technology, taking CapEx out, it's data as a service. Cody is delivering water as a service through his water farms and business models. So this is not a technology issue. This is a business model innovation play for both of them. That is a way to break down that status quo. And it's interesting, I think both of them would agree with this, that this really requires a paradigm shift. So when FIDO goes in, it's really changing how people think about non-revenue water and what is possible, or the art of the possible. Cody is doing the same thing in terms of democratizing access to safe drinking water. You know, his technology is not something that would be recognized by the Romans. And for the most part, the water infrastructure that we accept as normal looks like Roman infrastructure. So that's how they're having an impact. They both talked about leapfrogging technologies. So again, not transactional innovation, but really transformative, and the ability to deliver solutions in a way that the world has not seen before. Want to dispel the notion that because they're disruptive, truly in the definition of the word, that these things are not at scale. So FIDO's at scale. They built upon their initial work with United Utilities. They demonstrated, proved quantitatively that they could save about 50% of water loss. Cody's in 50 countries and delivering safe drinking water. And he talked about the Navajo Nation, that right now 500 homes have source panels. And next year there'll be 700 to 800, if I remember correctly. So last comment, disruption and solving some of these wicked water problems is going to come from outsiders. I think the usual suspects in general are going to look at incremental innovation and accept that as good enough. These are two people, and they're not alone, that don't accept that because they can do better. They've seen it done elsewhere. So anyway, water punks.
Fantastic summary as well. Thank you so much, Will. Any last words from Dana, Matt, or Tom? We have still 1 minute.
No, I mean, Will, you summarized everything beautifully. I think just the commonality as well between Victoria and Cody is they were both new to water as a kind of serial entrepreneur or coming from the renewable energy industry. And I think, Will, you mentioned about bringing in outsiders, and we really think that's important to bring in new perspectives and look at traditional problems, perhaps untraditionally. So I thought that was kind of a nice way of uniting the two panelists. But yeah, no, it was a really good discussion.
And just an addendum to that point about outsiders too, you know, one of the things that we've really stressed in our work is companies, again, that aren't necessarily seen as being water intensive or really seen as major contributors. We need everybody at the table. We need all companies at the table to really embrace water stewardship. And so that's how you really create something that is contagious, so to speak, and spreads, you know, throughout the watershed when you get just one company involved in action. So I think, you know, we got to quit looking at the sort of like 1% of like first movers and best actors in water stewardship and look at the other 99%. Get those companies, get those supply chains involved, and that can help us lead to transformative action.
Yeah, I would just build on that. And like, we really need to catalyze change at a basin level. And that's one thing that we're trying to do, is get companies within a single basin actually talking to each other and connecting those individuals in their own network. Because, you know, the efficiency of one facility in the same basin, we're all reliant on each other. And so I think all these corporates and, you know, other stakeholders need to work together.
Great last words. I'm afraid we have arrived to the end of this session. I'd like to thank all our facilitators and their invited guests for the very rich conversations. And I'm immediately transitioning to the closing of our whole finance track. I'm afraid our time is up. So I'd like to conclude by summarizing our sessions with just a couple of key messages that we've heard over the past nearly 3 hours. So we had, through a keynote, a roundtable, a case study session on supply chains, electric vehicle supply chains, and the recently concluded breakout rooms that we made the case. I believe that a concentration of investments could have a significant impact in driving to value water appropriately through, for example, demanding the right metrics or water management strategy or exercising voting rights. There are multiple ways for how the financial toolbox can be used to protect water systems, some of which are yet to mature, such as thematic funds, but active ownership is also one way. But there are no one-size-fits-all engagement recipe. We have also raised awareness about the deep interconnections between the net zero transition and how other environmental and social considerations must be made through case studies from one of the trending sectors like the electric vehicle supply chain. We've also said that we do need to connect more the site specifics to the enterprise and the supply chain level. It's not a direct road. We need more standards, more data across the whole supply chain. And we also cover disclosure and the need for increased water transparency across the whole financial sector. As I heard in one of the breakout rooms, it does make a difference in terms of investment process for an investor, what type of available data they have on water compared to carbon, for example, in order for them to understand the company's performance. And last but not least, we just couldn't agree more with the statement that we do need to democratize drinking water to everyone and ensure zero leakage through eliminating zero leakage to non-revenue water. So I trust that together we have bended the history in the right direction a little bit through this session. I'd like to extend my gratitude to all the speakers who have come forward today and send just the greatest kudos to the Morningstar Sustainalytics team, my colleagues Samantha Lyons, Tom Carroll, Paris Gittins, and the whole team that made this session as flawless and superb as we could make it be. Let me remind you all that this recording is going to be made available through CV's YouTube channel. You can connect with us as well through www.sustainalytics.com. With that, I wrap up this year's World Water Week Finance track. Thank you so much and goodbye.